Well, I got a hammer. Sing it out. I got a bell. I got a song. All over. Justice. It's freedom.
Hi, I'm Dolly Curtis, and I'm in Beacon, New York at the Beacon Sloop Club. And guess who I'm with? I'm with Pete Seeger. I really am. Hi, Pete.
Hello.
It's a great honor to be with you and a lot of fun.
Well, it's a pleasure to talk to you because I think you're a different kind of a television person. You're really concerned about what's going to happen to the world.
I've been concerned a long time, and you might be responsible for some of that, you know. When I was 12 years old, and 13 and 14 and maybe 15, I was in Bear Mountain, and you used to come. I was staying in a summer camp on Lake Tirati, and every summer you would come and spend a day and sing, and we would all sing all day. And on the website that describes you, they say that you used to go to these left camps. And I never knew it was a politically left camp, but I guess that's why I came out with all these liberal ideas that I have. I don't know.
I love to sing for kids. It gives me hope. You can't say there's no hope if you look at those little faces. And I'd sing at any camp that would have me. Left, right, upside down, right side up.
Well, you used to come and sing all day, and that was my first introduction to folk music, and I've been with it ever since, doing good things. And
well, keep in mind that what they call folk music now is a little different. The term was invented about the middle of the 19th century in Europe. It meant the music of the peasant class, ancient and anonymous. Here, about 100 years ago, a man named John Lomax started collecting cowboy songs. And he didn't just want to put these songs in a library someplace. He wanted people to sing these good old songs. And he put out a book of cowboy songs and got President Theodore Roosevelt to write a little foreword saying, yeah, they're good songs, sing them.
But when you first got interested, and I did some reading about you, it said, I mean, I've been watching and listening to all your songs and your concerts for years, but in the reading I did, it said you started as an archivist, or you started working in the Smithsonian archives.
Actually, I met a man, John Lomax's son, Alan. He was only 4 or 5 years older than I am. And he was in charge of the archive of folk song at the Library of Congress. That's where I worked. I think he took $15 out of his own pay for me to help him and had me listen to hundreds, thousands of records and help him catalog them.
So you were what, about 20 years old?
That's right.
I figured that you got interested when you were about 20.
Yeah.
And so when did you get interested in the 5-string banjo?
Actually, it was a little before that. I was 16 or 17, and my father takes me to a country music festival down in North Carolina, and up till that time, I only knew the 4-string banjo was what they used to play in jazz bands. I used to play in the school jazz band way back 1933, 34.
In California or in Paterson, New York?
No, that was in Connecticut. I went to a boarding school there.
Oh, really? You have that background too?
Well, my parents were split, and I was lucky to get a scholarship to a school otherwise quite expensive. But the old lady who paid the bills for the school liked a newsletter. I needed a few pennies I didn't have any allowance to speak of. I tried shining shoes for a nickel a pair, slow going. I found they had a mimeograph machine. Well, once a week I collected the news, I typed up the stencils, turned the crank of the machine, collated 3 pages and stapled them, and sold them for a nickel a copy and kept the money.
So this was in this,
This was like 1933, 34. Well, it's a most unusual school. It was started by a woman who had inherited a lot of money from her father, and she had become an architect, even though in those days women were not architects.
Oh, I bet.
And
1930?
when she got this money, she said, now I will design my school. And just as I had fallen in love with Kentucky mountain banjo picking, she fell in love with what's called Cotswold architecture in England, about 60 miles west of London. Thick stone walls, leaded glass panes, dark oak interiors. only had 90 students, but she let me stay there for full 4 years, even though it was an otherwise a very expensive school, because my little newspaper gave her the gossip of the school. From the headmaster, all she got were formal reports. But I told her every week, oh, Danny Smith was in the infirmary with a cold, and now it's maple syrup season. The biology teachers, Avon had 90 students. After the war, she was dead, but one of my fellow classmates went to the bank, which it had now owned the buildings. They said, we don't know how to run a school. Would you like to try? We'll give you a long time to repay us. So we started up again. Now it has 400 students and is a very well-known school.
Oh, so it's still going, the
Yeah.
school, in Avon.
Yes, near halfway between Avon and Farmington.
So Westminster, is this?
Well, there were 10 little farms that went down from the low hills across the fields to the Farmington River. And she bought all 10 of them up. And that's why she called it Avon Old Farms.
All right, so it's still going today,
Yeah.
in other words, the school. So I thought because your father was a musical professor at Berkeley, that you got your music from your father, and everyone in your family does music. Your sister does music, your grandchildren do music, your son.
Well, it's true. My father was an interesting guy. He was, as a teenager, he could look at a symphonic score with thousands of notes on a big page and know what it was supposed to sound like. There's the first violins, the second violins, the cellos, the bass, the oboes, the flutes, the trumpets. And he could look at all those notes and tell what it was supposed to be and turn the page. And he wanted to be a symphony conductor. But doing graduate work in Europe, he found he was going deaf. So, all right, I'll be a teacher. And at a very young age, he was in charge of the music department at Berkeley.
Right.
Well, his fellow professor said, Seeger, you may know music, but you're an ignoramus when it comes to history and economics. My father started monitoring his fellow professors' classes, and pretty soon he was radicalized.
At Berkeley, of course.
Yes.
Right?
One of his professor's friends took him out to the lettuce fields in the California Valley, and he saw small children picking lettuce that looked like his young son. My older brother was born then. And he said, this is disgraceful. He came back making speeches. A very proletarian voice came from the back of the hall saying, sit down, you lily-livered bastard. You're just learning about these things. We've known them all our life.
Oh.
My father went back and said, you're perfectly right, I'm just learning. The man was a wobbly. But pretty soon my father was radicalized. And when World War I came along, he made speeches against imperialist war and got fired.
I heard he got fired, but was he an East Coast person that ended up at Berkeley?
My father was old New England.
Old
The
New
name
England.
Seeger is from Germany. Karl Ludwig Seeger came over. He read the Declaration of Independence and couldn't wait to come. He was a young doctor. Anglicized his name to Seeger instead of Seeger. And his son was a doctor too. His son was an abolitionist, probably helped raise the money for the slaves of the Amistad and got them freed.
Oh, really? From New Haven.
And his son, my grandfather, had to help support the family because his father died when he was only 5 years old. And his mother had 3 boys, and they all had to make a few pennies here and a few pennies there. And then my grandfather was working as a teller in the local bank and reads that President Porfirio Diaz in Mexico was welcoming American investors to Mexico to build up the economy. Well, he studied Spanish with a friend, and the two of them saved their pennies and got a boat to Veracruz and a train for Mexico City. And he got a job as a reporter on the Financial Times, a small newsletter for the business community. Well, a year later, he knew where the money was, and he was in business for himself. And my father was actually born in Mexico City. Well, after he got fired, he came back east, and on
This is from Berkeley, after he got fired from Berkeley?
Yeah. And now he bought a little Model T Ford and built one of America's first automobile trailers. I was only a baby. When I was 1.5, he set forth with my mother, who was a very good violinist, and they planned to have a kind of one family Chautauqua tour. They put up posters, here Bach and Beethoven, Debussy. But the trip was a financial disaster. They hardly made enough to eat or gasoline. Speed was about 20 or 25 miles an hour over muddy dirt roads. They didn't have paved roads in 1920.
So you have in your family yourself, your brother Mike,
Yeah.
you have a sister.
Well, they're my half-brothers and sisters, and they were actually born after my own parents were split, and my father remarried an extraordinary composer, Ruth
Oh,
Crawford.
so all musicians again. Everyone's a musician. And also that's why there's so many sisters and brothers to you. 'Cause
All
there's
over the place.
2 families.
And children and grandchildren now.
Yeah, I see lots of children.
My grandson, Tao Rodriguez Seeger, he uses a hyphenated name. His father's Puerto Rican. He plays with the Mammals all over the country.
But look how many things you accomplished. I read the website that somebody made for you. And in that website, on your recordings, there must be 70 or 80 CDs that a person could go and find that you've recorded. And maybe 50 videotapes and articles that you've written or have been written about you, maybe 100, maybe 200. You need a whole snowy week.
Well, I tell people that
so
musicians and politicians are in the publicity racket. And people are hired to get you publicity. In every community in America, there are extraordinary people. Does anybody write about them? No, they're just known to their family and neighbors. Maybe they saved somebody's life. Maybe they raised a big family and they're all good kids that stay out of jail. So there are really heroic people all around America. But do they get publicity? No, they don't have publicity agents.
But musicians do, because
Yes.
when they come to town, they have to let
That's
people
right.
know. So
Gotta
they
sell tickets.
Fill up those halls. Well, I think we should tell people, in my life, which is interesting, but yours more interesting, we've crossed paths a few times, and it's just, we've been talking a little bit this week. I don't know how, but by chance, when some of the real monumental things that have happened to you, like the civil rights movement when you were there, and Paul Robeson's terrible night where he was attacked by very
Ku Klux
evil
Klan,
people.
there's no other word for it. They were members of the Ku Klux Klan.
And I happened to be there. I was just a youngster, but you were on the venue that night,
Yeah.
right?
I sang 3 songs before Paul sang for about an hour. And we thought we had solved the problem of attacks.
When could tell the audience when that was, because
September 4th, 1949.
so it was a Labor Day weekend then.
Yes. We were supposed to have sung 1 week earlier, August 27th, but a mob attacked the people setting up the stage. The mob burnt up all the chairs, they burnt up the paper, the literature. It was a fundraiser for the Civil Rights Congress, admittedly a left-wing organization. And the police watched while they did all this.
Well, we were in Peekskill. Well, I grew up
Well,
in Peekskill.
Robeson got on the air. He said, it's America, I have a right to sing, I am going to sing. And 1 week later, 1,500 or more men stood arm in arm around the whole field and would not let anybody in who hadn't paid for a ticket. And the concert did take place. However, when we left, the police directed all the traffic down one road. We could have gone ahead or to the left. I wanted to go to the left because I live north.
Sure.
But no, all traffic down here. And we just turned the first curve and there was a young man with a pile of stones, each about as big as a baseball, and wham at every car that came by at close range. Around the next curve was another young fellow with another pile of stones, wham at close range. There must have been 10 or 15, maybe more, piles of stones, each with a young man throwing them with all his might. We were driving a Jeep station wagon with 8 windows, 3 on each side, and a split windshield. Only the rear window was not broken, at least 1 or 2 times.
So you had your children with you?
We had 2 little babies. My father-in-law came, he said, I don't think you should take these babies. I said, there's not going to be in trouble after all that publicity. They won't try the same thing they did last week. Well, they didn't try the same thing. They tried something worse.
They had it even figured out better.
Yeah. And 2 other friends, so 7 or 8 of us in the car. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I told everybody, get down, And I held my head as high as I could. The glass flew around here, but none got in my eye, and I kept driving. There was a policeman standing only 50 feet past one of the stone throwers. And I tried to roll my window down, but it was so splintered I could only get an inch down. And I shouted, "Officer, aren't you going to do something?" Yes, this guy was throwing stones 50 feet away. The policeman just said, "Move on, move on." In other words, they knew all about it.
All was in cahoots together.
The interesting thing, I found out that the Truman administration actually started it in a way. Some high-up official came up to Peekskill and gave a speech to the American Legion. I think it was the American Legion, saying, "This man Robeson hates America. He loves Russia. He's coming here to sing. I'm sure you know what to do," and went back to Washington. But in Europe, they were shocked because the signs went up all through Peekskill the next day saying, "Wake up, America." Peekskill did. In other words, you too should throw stones at these commie traitors, or whoever you think are traitors. And in Europe, they said, "Don't you know that's the same sign they had after Kristallnacht in Germany?"
Wow.
Wake up, Germany, Munich did, or wherever it started.
Wow.
And so the Truman administration found itself in trouble. And the word must have come up from there, because about 5 weeks after the attack, I don't call it a riot, it was an attack, a very carefully planned attack. About 5 weeks later, all the signs came down. They were in stores, in
The Wake
windows.
Up America signs?
Wake Up America. They were on bumpers, they were in gas stations.
And then they all disappeared?
Disappeared just as quickly as they'd gone up, as though word had come from Washington, "Get those signs down."
My mom had all of us children all hiding in the woods. I mean, she was so terrified about this. There were airplanes flying all overhead when Paul Robeson was performing that night. She had all of us leave the house, and we lived in the woods that separated that drive-in theater to Hollowbrook Road. And I just remember, as a youngster, the frightening part of that, of being hid in the woods during that whole evening.
Well, to my mind, I was in the end encouraged, because that kind of violence was not a good thing, and most Americans didn't like it. It was shocking. Just like in Birmingham, when the dogs bit the children in 1963 and sprayed them with fire hoses. People saw it on TV. Said, "Is this America?"
Well, that happened with Katrina the same way.
Well, the
The
wonderful
visual
thing is,
image.
people all around America have gone down to New Orleans to help rebuild it. Volunteers, young people, old people. Just tell me what you need done. I'll dig a ditch. I'll repair something that needs repair.
Well, there's no doubt that once it's on television and the image, just like you said in Birmingham.
I'm more encouraged about my country than I have been in 60 years. Well, I think now it's going to be literally hundreds of millions of ordinary people that are going to save this world. It may be some women and children in some cities starting a community garden. It may be a few scientists here, or a few church people there, or maybe some people who like to use the internet and they're talking with each other. It's going to be millions upon millions of things, and who knows, music may be a part of it.
Oh, I don't doubt it. Like the Trestless
And
Lawn.
in the long run, maybe the American sense of humor will help as much as anything. Did you ever hear the song, "English is Crazy"? I think I sang it when I was at the Trestlers.
At the Trestless Barn.
English is the most widely used language in the history of the planet. 1 out of every 7 human beings can speak or read it. It has the largest vocabulary, perhaps 2 million words. But face it, English is crazy. I get the whole audience to sing it with me. It goes on, in what other country do you drive in a parkway and park in a driveway? Recite at a play and play at a recital. Have noses that run and feet that smell. English is crazy. It ends, and you have to marvel at the lunacy of a language in which your house can burn down, but it burns up. You fill out a form when you fill it in. Your alarm clock goes off when it goes on. And if a vegetarian eats vegetables, what does a humanitarian eat? English is crazy.
Do you think our sense of humor is going to do it?
One of the things that may save us. But who knows? The arts may save us. They can leap over language barriers, over barriers of religion and politics, whether it's dancing or singing or painting. Sports may save us.
Well, people surely love sports.
That's
They
right.
stop for the sports.
That's right. And who knows? It's true. God only knows what the future's going to be.
I mean, we came through other periods where people were watching every move, and like that time that you were in that terrible period where you were so courageous. I read all the proceedings on that website, by the way. They have all the proceedings, everything that happened in the...
Well, the appeals court acquitted me. They said, of course, they covered themselves. They said, we are not inclined to disregard charges of unconstitutionality, even though they may be made by those unworthy of our respect.
But it had to be very stressful, because that went on from
Well,
what, 1950. So I know that Martin Luther King was a big influence to you. You told me his philosophy always struck
King
you.
was almost the biggest influence on me of any single person in my life. I've been influenced by my father and by Woody Guthrie and by a lot of other people, and by my wife, who's the best organizer in the world. She had to become a good organizer to be married to me. I'm very unorganized. But I agree with King that the world is not going to last unless we learn how to talk with people we disagree with without having to kill them. And he, as a kid, oh, here's a story, you'd be interested. He was only about 14 years old and reads in the Atlanta Constitution a letter. Some man says, why do Negroes always want to marry whites? He writes a letter, dear editor, surely Mr. So-and-so, whoever wrote that letter, surely Mr. So-and-so must know that if there are people in America of mixed ancestry, it's not because Negroes want to marry whites, but because of aggressive white males taking advantage of defenseless black females. In one sentence, he said what other people would have taken a whole page to try and write. Then he did 4 years at Morehouse University in Atlanta, 3 years in divinity school in Pennsylvania, because his father was a preacher and they expected him to be a preacher. And then he wanted to do 2 more years in Boston University because he admired 2 professors up there. Now his own academic reputation had spread, and he was offered 3 good jobs to take jobs in the philosophy department of 3 separate northern universities. He turned all 3 down to go down to Montgomery, Alabama, to take a lower paying job in a little church, because he knew that was where the job had to be done. And the people who had to do the job, it was not going to be done by northern liberals. It was going to be done by the African American people of the South.
So were you actually there or not when they
I
had-
joined on occasion. I met King about a year later when he came up to Tennessee at the anniversary of the Highlander Folk School, the little school that Rosa Parks went to before she sat down in the bus. I said, what are you going to do when you get home to put into action what you've learned here? She said, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something. And she sat down in the bus. And when King went down there, he actually wanted to write a book in his spare time. But they asked him to have a meeting at his church. Her sitting down occurred on a Friday, and on Saturday evening, he spoke to about 200 people that came to his church. And the newspaper wrote it up. Ha, 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 the blacks are planning to have a bus boycott. Well, they advertised it, and the next night there were 2,000 people. They couldn't all get in the church. They were standing outside, and extra speakers had to carry his words. Years later, he said that was the most important speech he ever made. Maybe that's where he got off that wonderful statement, which has been quoted everywhere. The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral. With violence, you can murder the hater, but you do not murder hate, you just increase hate. Then he says, darkness cannot drive out darkness. It takes light to do that. Hate cannot drive out hate.
I know it's been a big influence on, it's a Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah.
Right, it's going
And
back to the
Gandhi learned from Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden,
Right.
way back in the year of, I think,
19th century.
1840, 1845. In 1850, Thoreau went to jail rather than support the Congress that passed the fugitive slave law. Said if a slave is trying to escape to Canada and you know where he is, it is your duty to turn him into the government so he can be returned to his owner in the South. And Thoreau said, I'd go to jail before I do that, and he refused to pay his taxes. Next thing, he was in jail. Ralph Waldo Emerson comes to see him and said, Henry, what are you doing in there? Henry says, Ralph, what are you doing out there?
Good point. But I mean, this courage that you mentioned, these people you have shown in your own life, standing up for these things.
I been fortunate. I've been able to make a living singing and getting people join in with me.
You just hide behind that 5-string banjo and say those things, but it really took courage to stand up to that.
Yeah.
That terrible committee that I read everything that they said to you, and you were
Well, they were kind of foolish.
Strong towards
They were foolish. And I wish I could argue with them. Now, however, I guess they're long dead mostly now. I was only about 36 years old then, and I think most of them were in their 40s or 50s or 60s.
Unfortunately, though, the repercussion of that, and then the group that you formed after that, the Weavers, or they had been in position at that time, it hurt everybody.
Well, we were blacklisted out of work.
Right.
We were on the hit parade in the summer of 1950. You could not escape the song Irene Goodnight. And we were headed for fame and sang in places like the Palmer House in Chicago and the Thunderbird Hotel in Las Vegas.
So even though you end up being acquitted or whatever, or whatever on the appeal, it still takes away the work.
No, I actually made a good living.
Singing
it was hard.
in those summer camps.
It was, no, I went from college to college to college. And the kids didn't care about my radical reputation. They liked the songs. I first sang in Oberlin in 1953. Then I sang the next year for twice as many people. And the next year I sang for 3 times as many people. Went back to every year to Oberlin for about 15 years until I was so busy I couldn't do that.
If I had a hammer, sing it. I had hammer in the evening, all over. Danger. Warning. Love. My brothers and my sisters. Oh. If I had a bell, ring it in the morning, ring it in the evening, all over. Danger. Warning. Love. Wait a minute, don't tell me I've forgotten the 3rd verse. If I had a song, if I had a song, sing it. Evening. All over. Danger.